what you see on the walls, you see those sheets, you can just about make them out. It's something I actually made here, weirdly enough. I did a course here for people who are unemployable, more or less, in the early 90s for about a year, and it was just printing techniques, but it was basically silkscreen printing. And I made this little booklet, which I put up on the walls here, in a room that had 10 Apple Macs, which was where the only computers on the campus. Little ones, tiny little Apple Macs, tiny screens. And it's basically a transcription of the graffiti from the men's toilets at the British Library. So what you have is this very sexually frustrated, angry, and quite competitive graffiti, but also very intellectual as well. So it's very funny graffiti. Different people going to the toilet would start a game, like word games, so there'd be different word games, there'd be puzzles set, people would have arguments, like very long arguments, and they'd kind of intervene and other people would intervene. So it's incredible graffiti of the old British Library. And so I just transcribed it and made a little book, but then I just put it in my parents' toilet. So weirdly, the talk starts in this building, strange enough. I hadn't even thought of it like that. In the bedroom, I did the only paintings I've ever really made, and this is about the life of Keith Moon. And it was a series of paintings, almost like a religious cycle, like Stations of the Cross, from his sort of birth to his death and then his subsequent resurrection, basically. So it was a very personal show, and probably the easiest exhibition I've ever done, because I didn't have to sort of take things anywhere, and it was just at home, doing it at home. So 2 years ago at the Hayward, I had a retrospective, I suppose you could call it that, and we did some sort of reconstruction of that room. It was a much bigger version of the room, but we tried to put some of the work in. And the reason I did that, I contained it in a reconstruction of the bedroom, was that it was actually a very good way to hold and to contain all this early work, which by itself might look a bit embarrassing and a bit, not particularly substantial, but when you put it in a room all together, it has its own life and it sort of makes sense. So if you'd gone to the Hayward, you'd walk into the Hayward expecting to be in this big, brutalist interior, but actually you ended up in a smallish suburban bedroom. So again, that's a kind of funny, strange route. I'd never expected that to happen. I'm probably best known, well, one of the things I'm best known for is this, as Scott so eloquently said, is acid brass, which is a brass band playing acid house music. And it was an idea I had in '96, and I did it in '97. And basically, it sort of liberated me from making artwork. It liberated me from having to print things, to make objects, to pin things up on the wall, which is basically what I was doing. A lot of which, like I said, I'd actually done here with the silk screen course. But this made me realise I didn't have to make things anymore. And since then, I've tried not to make objects and make things, because I'm not a technical person, and there's already enough stuff in the world, I felt. So this was the justification for a brass band to play acid house music. Is it legible? It is legible, that's good. And it's basically a look at how I think about music and how music and history intertwine in Britain. The way that a brass band is really redolent of industrial culture in Britain, but also brass bands became politicised through their association with trade unions, with the miners' strike and so on. So it's a form of folk music, but industrial. If you think about the instruments, they even look like industrial objects. And I was really interested in that culture and the geographical nature of it as well. So you have the brass bands on the right, and then on the left you have the acid house, and on the face of it they have these two music forms that have nothing in common, but of course acid house music also has had a very strong geographical basis in the north of England. It became a politicised form of music. It was almost amateur when it was made in Britain, and the parties were sort of amateur as well. So there's a lot in common, and of course it's all about the kind of communities that assemble around music, even though you're not expecting it really. But also it's a digital culture. Raves often happen in places where there was industry formerly, so in warehouses and old factories. So deindustrialisation actually helped with acid house, ironically. But it meets in the middle, that diagram meets in the middle really with media hysteria and civil unrest. And of course civil unrest with the deindustrialisation of Britain, we all know about that. And the media hysteria with acid house obviously came through the drug culture, and also the gatherings of people. When people gathered in great numbers, it was seen as a threat of some sort. So the Criminal Justice Bill, or it might be the Criminal Justice Act there, CJB, was brought in the early 90s as a way to not only to stop picketing and mass picketing, but also to stop people gathering to dance. So in this one Justice Bill actually tried to sort out both these problems at the same time. So I felt that actually had some sort of value as an idea. I'm just going to get some water. Because, you know, any music, you can play any kind of music in any way. You can play heavy metal on a cello, you can do this with that. That's fine, and that's a very well-known, almost a cliche now in terms of music. What I wanted to, this diagram really gives it a sort of a basis where it actually makes it not just a music project, but some sort of something else extra to it. You could call it art, I don't know. But what was really surprising was about the project, this is the media hysteria. I don't know if you know this. This is one of the most famous front covers of The Sun. And also it's one of the earliest uses of Photoshop, or what was called, whatever it was called then, because the people's eyes in the picture were all made white. So it made them look like they were zombies or demons or whatever. That was one of the earliest uses of that. That's your media hysteria. So what was surprising for me, and what was so exciting, was that when I rang the brass band up, I was absolutely terrified ringing this brass band saying I want you to play acid house music. I didn't even say acid house music, I said electronic music, contemporary electronic music, I said, because I thought they'd be very, very nervous about playing this music, but still had an aura about it in 96, 97. So I said that, and the manager just said immediately, yeah, we'll do it. And from that I just learned that actually the public, working with the public, as opposed to working with museums and institutions, is actually quite simple. Because the public are interested in doing things that are interesting. And if they want to work with you, they will, and if they don't, they won't. And that's it. And so the public actually are a lot more open-minded than you might think, a lot more open-minded than certainly journalists can be, or even institutions. So after that, I never really had much fear working with the public, because on the whole, they were pretty cool. They've always been good to me. So this is what happens. This is what it looks like when we perform the acid house music, and we still do it. It was done at Tate Britain just before Christmas, and it's going to be done at the Royal Festival Hall, fingers crossed, in June. So it's ongoing. It still happens, and it's, you know, it's fun. And because of all these rising festivals, this whole new sort of culture of festivals, where people of my age, or even a little bit younger, now still go to festivals. It's actually a very popular thing for people to hear and see. So it's sort of matured almost, weirdly enough. So that was a very helpful point in my career. Like I said, it sort of liberated me from making things, and it meant I could just really play around as I felt, sort of play around with culture and history, and make mischief in a way with what was around me, and not feel like I was bound to sort of doing a show in a gallery or a commercial gallery show. It meant making money was more difficult, but it was a lot more exciting and more fun, working in these very random ways, really. What I felt was quite random and slightly risky as well. So this is an image from the miners' strike, very famous image of a picket saying something to, obviously, a policeman, probably because the policeman had done something, I imagine. It's the 30th anniversary this year, you might be aware of that, and there's a lot of events going on around it. But I was always interested in this as a young person. I'd lived through the strike, through the television, basically, as we've lived through a lot of things through telly. And it was something that bothered me at the time, especially this one day when this battle had happened near Sheffield. It's called the Battle of, well, it became known as the Battle of Orgreave. It was about between 15,000 police and striking miners. And it was a pitched battle, which ended in basically a rout of the miners through a village, up a hill, with horses, dogs, everything. It was like something out of a medieval battle. This is another image from the strike. I mean, at the risk of boring you, I think if anyone who was around at the time and conscious and above the age of 15, or was living in the north of England, this was a moment in their lives that they'll never forget, because it was such a highly contested moment in British history. And it was for people in the north of England, in pit villages especially, it was a fight to the death, effectively. And it was also a moment when the police were basically occupying parts of Britain, and in quite a scary way if you lived in pit villages. So it mobilised everybody. As you can see from this picture, women played a huge role, and these women they're not young, and they're sort of fighting the police or trying to prevent the police from going past and so on. So it was a huge moment in British history where people really were divided as to who they supported. There was very little middle ground to be taken. It was either one thing or the other. Really, So images like this I could look at forever, but we won't, I promise, because what I did was I recreated that battle that I was telling you about, called the Battle of Orgreave. And this is one image from it. I did it for a variety of reasons, one of which was I really wanted to go back to a point. You know, when a crime is committed, like a child is abducted or there's some brutal murder, and the police have no idea what really happened, they will reconstruct the crime for the public to jog their memory. Sometimes it's even done because they think the person that did the crime will actually go and watch the reconstruction. But on the whole, it's to jog the public's memory. And I felt what I was doing was like a reconstruction of a crime scene to jog people's memory. But it was like with 1,000 people. So it's some sort of form of public inquiry, but a physical performance art version of a public inquiry. Also, I was interested very much in reenactment societies. So we recruited people for this reenactment from former miners who actually were part of this battle and part of the campaign, but also from people from reenactment societies. Because reenactment societies are very strange things, because these people, you know, they dress up anyway every weekend as Roman centurions, or this is American, actually I don't know what that is. It might be American Civil War, or English Civil War, Napoleonic, every period from history, but they stop at 45 basically. There's a few Korean War people, but they basically stop at 45. So history ends at 1945, and also the history of battles ends. So I wanted them to think about history, British history and battles going up to almost the present day within living memory. And also as an opportunity for the guys that do this to finally meet someone who's a veteran of a campaign, because they'll never meet anyone from the Middle Ages or from Roman Britain, however much they might want to. So it's like, now you can meet some miners who are actually part of this campaign. And so these two cultures clashing, and two views of history, because the view of history of reenactment societies is about battles, it's about numbers of men, about the kind of badges worn, the kind of guns they had, all that kind of stuff. It's the sort of technicalities of war, whereas of course the miners' strike was a war, is a political and social war, and a cultural war. So it's about two versions of war, but also two groups of people that might have very, very different versions, ideas about history, coming together and maybe discussing it, and then having like this fight, basically. So it was an interesting time, and I think at the moment at the time I didn't really stress it as much, but for me it was as much about reenactment of history than it was about the miners' strike, and about this sort of obsession we have in Britain with history. I mean, if you visited Britain now and you're from abroad, you'd still think the Second World War was going on. If you turn on the television schedules, we're still obsessed with that. So it was about the British love and obsession with their own history and other histories. There's another still from it. So people asked, oh, this was going to, you know, of course, when you make art with groups of people, with communities, in inverted commas, with the public, everyone assumes you're trying to make the world a better place, and you're trying to be someone who is healing wounds and sort of making a cathartic exercise. I had no interest in that whatsoever. If anything, I wanted to make people really angry again and disturb people and make it a really unsettling experience, like a kind of ghost or a phantom had appeared and this thing had happened again. So I wasn't interested in that, and I still am not, but that is often the justification for making artworks on this scale and art like this. But for me, it was, if anything, the opposite. It was to wind people up, and like digging up a body and doing another post-mortem, basically. And it was meant to be an unpleasant experience, in a sense, and to make people feel upset. Now, from the sublime to even more sublime. So that's, you know, so really it's about Britain trying to deal with the end of an industry. The miners' strike was a very violent end of an industry, effectively. I think there's 3 coal mines left in Britain at the moment. And you can end things in different ways. You can end them through culture, or you can end them through violence, basically, and that was ended through violence. This photograph, in a way, is a sort of a prediction of what was to come. This is taken in 1973, and it might not be clear what's going on in it. This is really this is an image of the wrestler Adrian Street, the guy in the costume, obviously, going back to the mine he used to work in Wales, to have his photograph taken with his father, who's the man on the left, who he hated thoroughly, and who hated him. Adrian hated the culture of mining. He hated everything about mining. He hated Wales, the Welsh, He has nothing good to say for it. But at the age of 15, he went to the mine, and then within a year, he was in London working as a bodybuilder, being photographed for bodybuilding magazines, which he didn't realise at the time are basically sort of gay, very soft porn magazines. He thought that it was about the admiration of his physique, but it was actually about something else. So in 1973, after being a wrestler for about 10 years, he returned to the mine because he was asked where he'd like to have his photograph taken for Sunday People newspaper. And he said, I want to go back here and have this photograph taken in front of all these people to show them what I've made of myself with my life. And that's what he's doing. So it's a revenge photograph. Massively disturbing photograph as well, I find. He's about 5'7", Adrian, 5'6". He's about my height. He's tiny. He's one of the most physical people you could ever hope to meet, or hope not to meet, actually, sometimes. But for me, this is a photograph very similar to the miners' strike work, in a way, of Britain changing, or trying to change, from an industrial country into a country that we know it as now, really, which is basically a country about services, but also about entertainment. The entertainment industry has become one of the foremost industries in Britain, and it's become the obsession of the people. And that's what keeps us, what holds us together in Britain, is what we see on TV or X Factor, whatever. It's not our jobs necessarily. It's not the fact that we are miners. It's the fact that we watch this or we do this. So that's what this picture is about. It's really about Britain changing. And I've said it loads of times, but I really think it's probably the most important image taken in Britain since the war, because it shows this process. Even though Adrian probably wasn't massively aware of what he was doing by this, for him it was all about hatred of his father, but in a way it's hatred of what his father represented as well, that world. So for me it's almost like a William Blake type image, like Jerusalem, you know, the poem Jerusalem, someone coming almost to rescue us from the future, or this kind of Christ-like figure coming to show us what the future will be like. And that's what he's doing. He's showing these people, these miners. Those men at the back used to beat him up, he said, because he used to have his hair long when he was 15, well, long for the 1950s, and they used to cut his hair in the mine and pin him down and cut his hair really roughly and stuff. So he hated them. This is Adrian in the 60s in London. What's brilliant about Adrian is that he's documented his life thoroughly, and there's an amazing book in this because he has thousands of pictures of himself, getting old basically, as you'd expect. But they're all incredible photographs. I'll just show you a few. This is him in America. He went to America in 1980 at the age of 41 to find, because wrestling was taken off the telly in Britain. So he went there and reinvented himself yet again. He still wrestles. He's in his 70s. It's kind of a famous picture of him. I'm going to try and show you some footage. If it goes wrong, we might have to turn the lights on. I'm just warning you. I've got to do this thing here. So this is, I made a film with Adrian. I went to see him in Florida, where he lives, and I made a film about him. It's like 26 minutes long. This is the first 4 minutes. I thought you'd like to see it. It's him reciting a poem about himself, because he made a glam rock album, and it's reciting a poem about himself, and all the footage you see he shot, because, you know, as well as documenting his life, he was filming a lot as well, and it's about his holiday he had in Africa. So we'll just watch the first 4 minutes and then we'll go back to the talk, as it were.
I could be a tulip, I could be a man. The only way of knowing is to catch me if you can. You may suppose what you want to suppose, but I'm a sweet transvestite with a broken nose. I've got to be royalty, my blood must be blue. I'm king of the ring and queen of it too. Have you ever seen muscles on a rose? I'm just a sweet transvestite with a broken nose. I'll kiss you or I'll kick you, that's what I like the best. I'm as tough as Marciano and as sexy as Mae West. I'm as cute as Shirley Temple and as fast as Bruce Lee. I could kill a man, eventually. If you're a he, she, or it, you'd better answer my calls. I'm like King Kong with lipstick. I'm like Fay Ray with balls. I wear mink and sable when the cold wind blows. I'm just a sweet transvestite with a broken nose. This will be somewhere in the region of the 15,000th time I've walked out in front of an audience. I'm actually making my own personal history tonight because I've wrestled in 7 different decades, 2 different centuries, 2 different millenniums. At 16 years of age, I'm walking in the ring for the first time. It was like an unbelievable dream come true. I couldn't even feel my feet touching the ground. I felt like I was walking on a cloud.
Adrian Street has just come back from Africa. And he's got quite a tan on him too, as colour set owners will notice probably. That is not makeup.
If I'd been born in a different age, like 1,500, 2,000 years ago, something like that, I would have been a gladiator. I would have been a Roman gladiator out of choice. Not because I was a slave and made to. That's what I would have loved to have done. And the thing is that professional wrestling, it wasn't just actually fighting somebody and bettering somebody that appealed to me, as all that did, but it was dressing up to do it.
So Adrian is a character. I mean, obviously as a character, he's an extremely interesting person, but because he represents all these changes in British society, which he's not even aware of himself a lot of the time, it makes him even more fascinating. So I'm quite attracted to people like that. So when I showed the film, this is at the Hayward, I thought, you know, video art is often shown in a very similar way. I just thought I had to show it in a slightly unusual way. So I have these, whenever I show it around the world, if I can, I'll get a mural artist to make a mural about his life and have it around, because in a way his life cannot be contained on a TV screen or in a projection even. It has to have this sort of fantasy painting around it, and he definitely sees himself as this sort of superhero in his own life and his own narrative. So that's why you have images of that. So that's the image from the coal mine to the paradise that he lives in Florida. Another project I've been involved in for some years now was called, well, it's called Folk Archive. I started in 2000, it sort of ended in 2005, and it was a look at great popular, what I would call vernacular, popular and folk art around Britain, contemporary versions of it as well as traditional versions of it. This is from Blackpool. I don't know if any of you have been to Blackpool. I know some of you know it very well, which is probably the sort of, if you want to test the temperature in Britain of popular culture and what the concerns are and what's in and what's out, you go to Blackpool, because that is the sort of cutting edge place for pop culture and vernacular culture in Britain. So this was on near the pier. It's a pizza place. I mean, I don't have to explain why this is brilliant to you, obviously, but I will explain it to you. You know, instead of Pizza Hut, Pizza Rut. I mean, Blackpool is all about inversion, and great folk art and popular art often is about inversion. So you're making a positive point about something negative. So you're advertising how terrible your pizzas are, and people will still eat them. And what was brilliant about that pizza, it's huge. It's not a real pizza, obviously, but they'd made it with something. I don't know what they'd made it with, so it had mould all over it. It was just disgusting. It was so disgusting. So Blackpool is obviously, you know, the place to go. It's the centre of the universe in terms of British pop culture, that's for sure. Then there's Notting Hill Carnival. There's all these things. These are objects that are made. There's all the creativity that goes into making things that people might not necessarily as artworks, but obviously have a huge influence on artists. And in a way, a sort of aesthetic challenges to contemporary art. Again, inversion. This is something called the World Gurning Championship in Egremont in Cumbria. It's when you have to make yourself as ugly as you can without using your hands. So you manipulate your face through just making faces, basically. And this is the guy that wins most years, Tommy. And what it's about is about transitioning from being. He's actually quite a good-looking. He is a good-looking guy, but you wouldn't know it from looking at that. And so you have to make these faces like animals or whatever. And you put this yoke around you, which is, would have been on a horse or something, and then you can make gestures and so on. So it's turning yourself into an animal of some sort, or some sort of ogre. It's amazing. Again, it's inversion. It's the opposite of a beauty contest, basically. At Egremont, we met someone who spent most of his life making a steam train fanatic who makes things, is interested in circuses, and this was an elephant that gives children rides with a lawnmower engine in it, which has reverse, so that it reverses as well, and it sort of moonwalks. It's very noisy and smelly. Kids are terrified of it when they're on it. Parents are almost in tears of joy, though. It's a very funny thing to experience, and as you can tell, he's a character and a half. And so what is brilliant about doing shows like that is the fact that you get out of London and you travel around Britain and you find things like that. I mean, we had no idea that existed in the morning when we went to this sort of fair, and then you see this thing and you realise you've sort of hit the holy grail, really, of what we would call folk art or vernacular. I mean, we call it folk archive because the word folk is such a contentious term. We thought we'd just stick it in there, and it's not an archive either. So we just were trying to sort of wind people up. Sometimes I've worked with a banner maker called Ed Hall. He makes trade union banners and amongst other things, but mainly trade union banners. You'd know his work. If you've watched the news in the last 5 years, you'd have seen his work at the head of any demonstration, Stephen Lawrence inquiry, which is held just across the road, actually. All these major moments in British history, Ed has made a banner for, basically. And I've worked with him quite a lot from the last 12, 13 years. This is a banner he made for me for a procession in Manchester I did. I wanted a procession to show the street life of the town. So there's buskers, big issue sellers, people who like certain kinds of music, all kind of people you'd see more or less every day, or not really, or not rate necessarily, or think we're antisocial. So all these emo kids that sort of gather in cathedral gardens. And one of them was a group of people smoking, walking down the street. I mean, you couldn't get anything more normal than that. But weirdly, we nearly had to cancel the whole procession because one of the councillors in Manchester, a former smoker, I hasten to add, was this fundamentalist anti-smoker, and so we had to put the banner behind says "Smoking kills." You can just make it out as the black and white banner. That was our that was the compromise we had, but we actually thought that was brilliant to have a banner promoting smoking, essentially, in a way, and then one behind telling you off for smoking. And it's designed by David Hockney, and so we just walked through Manchester with that. Often things you want to do don't work out, and this time next week I'm going to be talking in Washington, D.C., and a few years ago, well, about 8 years ago, I went to Washington with an idea for the Smithsonian Institute and the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, which was for them to host a life drawing class, and for the subject of the life drawing class to be Iggy Pop. And then he would be drawn by people who wouldn't know at the beginning of the day of the class that their subject would be this American whose body has sort of represented so much in rock culture, but also in popular culture. And we got quite far-ish with negotiations with Iggy Pop, but in the end he said he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be naked for so long, which is unusual because his body he uses it so much in his performances. So I just got someone to do some drawings of what it might have looked like, what an Iggy Pop live class might have looked like, because often even whoever within the art world, sometimes you think you can do more or less whatever you want, but you do come across moments when you can't do anything, you can't get what you want. This was an idea for the fourth plinth that I was shortlisted for, to have a vehicle from Baghdad that had been destroyed in a bomb attack, or from anywhere in Iraq, just plonked on the fourth plinth, so people in Britain could see what was going on over there as a piece of evidence, effectively, from the war, because you don't get to see things or hold them or get any close to things from wars like that. Again, it's all through telly. This is the model I made for it. I didn't get it, and I wasn't surprised. I just thought if they choose that, they're kind of mad to choose this, because it could lead to disturbances. I had no idea what the result would be of having that, but I did think it was something that should be done, or something should be done with objects from Iraq. So I had an idea of doing a museum about the Iraq War in 2006. Of course, it was an ongoing war at the time. You could still argue it is sort of in a state of war, but then it was basically a civil war, with the Americans in the middle, not knowing what to do. And so I got a car from Iraq, and I took it on a tour of America in 2009. and we took an Iraqi citizen with us and an American soldier. So we towed a car across America in full view at all times with that sign on. I don't know if you can read it. This car was destroyed by a bomb in a Baghdad marketplace on March the 5th, 2007. And we just basically pitched up. It was very low key, really, considering what we were doing was quite controversial or provocative or potentially confrontational. We just turned up in town, sometimes planned, sometimes not planned, got out the truck we were towing it with, and then gave out flyers to people, and then we just kind of see what happens. And sometimes, on the whole, we were fine. We'd never got physically attacked. A few people weren't very happy with us. Weirdly, the people that were least happy with us were anti-war people, because they felt we weren't being anti-war enough in what we were doing, because we were so bland in our presentation, which was the whole point. They felt what we should have been more bells and whistles and so on. And we weren't doing that. It wasn't a work of activism, even though it might appear to be one. It wasn't an activist thing. It was something much more unpredictable and more like an artwork in a way. So we did this. This is in Arizona. And we filmed some of the interviews. I'm going to try and do this tab thing again. I'm just going to warn the technical guys here that there might be some. Okay, so it's that. No. So it's not that one. Can you just come and give me another hand for a sec? I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on with that. Okay. All right. It's not that one. I'll talk while this is going on. It's on that one, I think. It's going to be one of these mobs. I think it's 29. Yeah. So what we did was we'd pitch up, we'd talk to people. You just pause it for a sec, yeah. And this is that's fine. And we made little films with people. And like I said, as you'll see, it's not the best quality. And the whole point about doing this was it was never going to be the highest end quality anything. It had to have a kind of home, some kind of grassroots feel, because that's how I work. But also, it shouldn't have been too well organised in a sense. It had to be a bit rough and ready. So we stopped at places and we did interviews. And this is one of the interviews we did in Memphis. So it just gives you an idea of the kind of conversations you had, because of course you start with conversations about the war, and then it just goes off into these like bizarre sort of conversations about things. And this is in Memphis, which I'd recommend anyone go to if they're ever in America.
Anytime the country goes through hard times, the Great Depression, World War II, or anything else, it's the culture that brings people together. It's all about history. Stax Music, Isaac Hayes, Otis Redding, Booker T and the MGs, Sun Records, all of it. It all started here. All of it started here. Memphis gets a bad rap, but people in Memphis work harder to get along because of the adversity that they've been through. And that if people in other places could see how hard people in Memphis work to get along and to right the wrongs of the past, it wouldn't have such a bad reputation. I love Memphis. Memphis is a great place. And when I moved down here last year, I decided that's the last time I'm moving. I'm never going back to Nashville. I'm staying right here in Memphis. And, this is it. Because I'm old now. I'm getting close to retirement.
Did you feel isolated when you were, because of your political views early on?
God, yes. My daughter that I told y'all about, that chewed the cop out, at the time that happened, she was ill. And a few months later, she died.
Sorry.
And the same lady that called the cops on her, I was standing outside the day before the funeral. And we were planning some funeral arrangements. And this lady had the nerve to walk up to me and tell me that the reason that my daughter died was that God was punishing us for not supporting George W. Bush. And I mean, that did something to me. I mean, it just kind of turned me against any type of religion. And, as far as just being bipartisan and forgive and forget, no. You can't forgive and forget. Like that car over there, they got blown all to pieces. The people live over there. How many of their loved ones died in that blast? Should they forgive and forget? They didn't come over here and start a war on us. We came over there and started a war on them. Why shouldn't they hate us forever? If someone did that to, know, to my neighborhood, I guarantee you, I'd hate them forever. But Americans have a sense of entitlement, and everything's owed to us. Why? Why should we have everything?
On that. Excuse me. Can someone just come and just get this back to the... Thank you. All right. It's not that difficult. Great. So, yeah, so that's... So we made these little films, put them online and all that kind of stuff. But that was part of a longer film, actually, about his daughter and so on, getting an argument with the policeman for putting up a political sign in her garden during an election. But you ended up having conversations that went from very personal to very global, political in sort of seconds, and then back again. And it was, as an artist, it was probably the most enjoyable, well, as a human being, basically, it was the most enjoyable month of my life, I think, just going on the road with a group of guys with a purpose, a very serious purpose, but actually it was actually incredibly, it was a lot of fun as well, weirdly, and because you never really knew what was going to happen next at any time of day, and that's an exciting thing, I think, the sort of randomness of everyday life, and you're really quite exposed in a sense, and you're out there in the elements, and you really don't know quite who or what will happen next. Also, the car was seen mainly when it was on the road by people. And people would take photographs, look at it, and so on. And that's in the desert in California, just people looking at it. And there's another picture of her taking a picture later. The car now, well, soon, when the Imperial War Museum reopens in July, it will be in the atrium, it will be in the main exhibition space, and it was until the Imperial War Museum closed. So that's it in London. So it's about a mile from here or less, or will be soon. For me, that's sort of the perfect end to the project, because it was never meant to be seen as an artwork. If you put that in the Tate or in a gallery, people just look at it and say, isn't that beautiful, with all that lovely red colour and the contours, it's like this, it's like that. It was never meant to be that, but that's the danger of doing art with things like this. And like I said, it was never an artwork as an object. So now it's back to being an exhibit in a museum, which I'm very happy about. I'm interested in history, as you can probably tell, not just recent history, but also ancient history. If any of you saw the film that was playing when you came in earlier, this is some stills of this. This is 2 years ago I made a scale model of Stonehenge as an inflatable structure that the public can go on. And in a way, it's about playing with history. And in a way that, in a sense, artists, they play with things. They play with culture, they play with history, they play with ideas. And I just felt it was a good... I love this sort of prehistory, these sort of objects. We have no idea what they're for on the whole. We really have no idea, which is so great about them, because you can project, you can put all your thoughts and about the modern world on these things, as people do. And so I was very excited to do this, and so we made it, and clearly a very popular thing. But I took a series of photographs of young people on it, gymnasts, almost floating on it, like they're being levitated. So there's still this sort of mystical element to it, but it's definitely about playing with and enjoying your history and not being afraid of it, not being intimidated by it, as people often are with Stonehenge. And what I like about Stonehenge is that, like with the British identity, it can't be really defined, because A, it's always changing, but no one really knows what it is. No one really knows what British or English identity is, just as no one really knows what Stonehenge was for. Even though Stonehenge is used as a symbol of the UK, it's still not clear what it was. So that was probably like the stupidest artwork I've ever made, and it's almost so stupid that Banksy could have made it. That's the way I look at it. And but he didn't, thankfully. It's the kind of thing he might have done, but we can talk about that later. About stupidity. Coming near the end, this is last year now. We're really quite recent. I was asked to do the Venice Biennale. I don't know if you represent Britain. I don't know if any of you know that much about it, but it's really the biggest thing you can be asked to do as an artist, I think, to represent your country, but also it's on such a massive, so much focus on it as an art event, that everyone will see it, more or less, in the art world at least. Not everyone in the world, but everyone in the art world will see it, and everyone in the art world will have an opinion about it, because not only are you represented there, There's 35 other countries represented in these gardens with their own buildings for each country. So it becomes a very competitive, comparative exercise. So you can go either way, really. You can do kind of international art world artwork, which is like a pile of shoes in the corner or something similar, if you know what I mean. There's that kind of work, but it could appeal to anyone because there's no language barrier. It's an abstracted sort of piece of work. Or I thought, well, I'm going to make something that's actually aimed at the UK. I'm not going to worry about making something that someone from China might not understand, or from wherever, Peru or whatever, because I just felt I'd make something for Britain. Because I knew that in Britain people will hear about this, I made it for the domestic market. Having said that, I think within the show, as I'll show you some images from it, it's more or less there's universal themes within it. It's not, you don't have to know about Britain to appreciate some of the work. So the British Pavilion is this beautiful building, I think. It's like a temple almost, classic sort of art gallery space. And I don't really work in those spaces, as you've seen. But what I noticed was that when you walked up to it, that's the back wall where that bird is. It was illuminated because it was top lit. So you could see whatever was on the back wall from about 300-400 feet away. So when I went on the site visit, I realised I had to do something on the back wall. And I was thinking about a number of things at this time last year, maybe a little bit earlier, things that have bothered me about Britain. So I thought I'm going to make a show about things that bother me, but also things I like about Britain. And I called the show English Magic. I didn't even call it British Magic. I thought I'd go even more focused and more contentious by using the word English, which is again another very loaded term. So the image there you see there is of a hen harrier. It's a bird, obviously, holding a Range Rover in its claws. There we go. That's the Range Rover, clearly. And it referred to a story about it from 2007, where 3 members of the public, including a wildlife officer, were in Norfolk near the Sandringham estate on a bird reserve, and they'd seen 2 hen harriers being shot out of the sky. Now this bird is it's extinct now in Britain, in England I should say. I think it's extinct because they get trapped and poisoned and shot on grouse. They like grouse chicks, and of course grouse are hunted for money, and so whenever these birds are seen, they're killed. The only 2 people shooting that day on the Sandringham estate were Prince Harry and a friend of his. So it's very, very likely that Prince Harry killed, or his friend killed these 2 birds. Now, if you or I killed these birds, we'd probably go to prison and were caught. It's very difficult to catch people who kill animals on these huge estates because there's no one around. But this unusually had 3 witnesses. He was questioned, and then it all got a bit fuzzy, and the charges were dropped. But he basically was very likely killed the bird, or at least his friend did. So I thought, weirdly, I got that story from the Daily Mail, and I got that video of David Cameron from the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is a very good source for sort of anti-establishment stories. And I remembered it at the time, and the more I thought about it, the more angry it made me. And I just thought, right, well, I am going to do this pavilion about things that make me angry, and I'm going to make this the sort of centerpiece, because I wasn't going to have Prince Harry in the Tannons. Obviously, that would have been a bit tacky. So I had a Range Rover, which is a car. I'm a cyclist, and that's the car of bullies, basically. And so I felt that could go there. So you have this mythological figure, basically. And the show is full of mythologies, ancient and present. So you have this sort of avenging narrative going through the exhibition. So that's the door you go through to see Prince Harry's, the bird and so on. And this was the back wall, and it was a painting of a city on fire. And it's actually St Helier in Jersey. Is anyone here from Jersey? That's okay. That's your hometown being burnt to the ground. And I did that because, as you know, you must know, a lot of money is laundered through London and goes to these tax havens. And the Channel Islands, and Jersey especially, is a huge, huge tax haven where money just disappears. And so I constructed a narrative, a futuristic narrative in 2017. There's a demonstration by mainland taxpayers, I'll call them, like people like ourselves. We go to St Helier, we have a demonstration about their tax policies and how opaque their financial institutions are, and by accident we burn the city down, and that's the city being burned down. And what you have to the left of it is a banner made by Ed, my friend, which is one of the banners from the demo, which is actually, it looks like a face or almost like an owl or something, but it's actually a piece of design I did. It's actually a financial structure of something called the Jersey cash box, and it's so those lines and those red and the purple all actually represent things like where money is hidden and so on. And there's another one, a much more sophisticated one of a face, like a primitive mask, almost like an angry face, which is another one. It was about Tesco, so that was on the other wall. So it's quite an angry room, really. It's all about getting our own back, getting vengeance. And throughout the room, there were Neolithic flints and axe heads in different shapes, and I'll show you. So that's three records. These are the master discs for the records that you may have heard when you were coming in with those tracks on the steel band. And these are Neolithic 6,000 to 8,000-year-old arrowheads winding their way round these records. So I was trying to mix the past, present, and future. And for me, you know, one of my happiest experiences ever is going into a town and walking around a museum that I've never been to. And then you go from prehistoric art into impressionism, and you go back to medieval metalwork, and then you go somewhere else. So there's a sort of time-traveling theme within the show. So these objects, contemporary objects, interacting with very old objects. We even had a hand axe in there. We had hand axes throughout, above the doorways, almost like sentinels, and some of those were over 500,000 years old. This was the other room. That painting is huge. You probably can't really tell, but you probably tell from those frames on the right. That's a picture of William Morris, the arts and crafts philosopher, designer, author, general sort of Renaissance man, really, destroying Roman Abramovich's yacht called the Luna. Abramovich had parked in 2011 his yacht right next to the Giardini, but also had taken over a huge amount of pavement space with a security wall that he put up so people couldn't even get close to his yacht. People were outraged by this, which in a way you can understand because it was a very tacky thing to do, but that is the nature of the art world at the moment, at least one version of the art world. These people are here, you know, they have, I wouldn't say invaded, that's probably the wrong term, but they are there, and that was their show of their power and their influence within the art world. So there's Morris coming back from the dead as a Poseidon, as a sort of mythological character to destroy the yacht, because he would have, if he'd have been around, he would have hated that. I mean, because of his hatred of sort of ostentatious luxury. So I just imagined this kind of revenge scenario. These objects are from the fall of the Soviet Union. They're tokens, workers' tokens and share tokens that workers were given in state factories and industries that they worked in as a way of giving them a share of these newly privatized companies, but obviously became worthless very quickly because the companies were taken over by other people, or the shares were bought up before, or they became, like I said, they lost their value very quickly, but they are incredibly symbolic as objects. There's also some shares here of companies that didn't exist, so people were basically ripped off because of their naivety about the market system. A lot of people made a lot of money through pyramid selling schemes and so on. So it's just these series of objects from the fall of the Soviet Union, so highly charged, often quite beautifully designed objects that have these stories behind them of sort of mayhem and murder and gang warfare and so on. This was a room about the war in Iraq. When you do Venice, you pull in every favour you can, basically, and one of which was a charity that I've worked with a little bit with prisoners. And I went to the charity and said, I had an idea about having a room full of artwork made in prisons. And what this is a room of artwork made by soldiers who have found themselves in prison. And there are a lot of soldiers, or former soldiers, in prison. And it's a portrait gallery about the war in Iraq, interspersed with photographs of daily life in the army. So this is one of the daily life in the armies. This is a drawing by a former soldier of something he saw just before he was deployed in Afghanistan. It was in Wellington Barracks in London. He said just before they went there, he went to the barracks, and there's a lot of guys in the room, more than two, like 8, sitting and standing near this huge Union Jack, all smoking crack, because it was their last night in London, so they're having this sort of like drugs party in the barracks. So they're kind of quite strange stories. The portrait of Tony Blair, which is basically what it looks like at the moment, and more or less that's what he's turning into. And that's another one. That's a sort of scope, sniper's scope. So it's really about. I'll go back. I'll just show you. I wanted it to look really nice. That's a terrible word to use. Nice. I wanted to frame and make the work look like the British Museum, the way they frame prints and drawings. And so we basically copied the British Museum style with mounts and frames. And we hung it in a very traditional way. That looks like a very traditional show, and it was meant to be, because all the chaos and mayhem is in the work. You don't have to make a big fuss about the work. When you read the labels of some of them especially, they're quite poignant, clearly quite poignant, especially when you know who some of the people are that are being drawn. I had a series of like 10 people I wanted drawn, and the rest it was just freeform. So I just sort of sat in prisons. About this time last year, I was going around prisons in Britain, sitting with former soldiers, and they were talking about things they'd seen or done or had happened to them. And I'd just say, I'll just do a drawing of that. That sounds good. And that's what happened, basically. It's actually a very enjoyable part of preparing the exhibition. You may have seen the film as you were coming in. We showed it at about 5:45 to 6 o'clock. It's a film that really ties up all the themes of the show. In the film, 2 Range Rovers get crushed and destroyed. And that's one of them, which I turned into seating. So as I saw it, I was turning something that was essentially useless into something that had a use, that had a useful. And the music is played by a steel band, and it's a piece of Vaughan Williams, a guy called Gerald, Voodoo Ray, and a David Bowie song. And it was meant to tie the show up in a way, and the music was heard throughout the pavilion. But it was a way of trying to get some ideas out, and also offering people something to look at and sit and watch. This is something by Scott King, who you may know, who we did a show a few years back. We did a room in an exhibition. I won't go into details, but anyway, I had the idea, and Scott had done these tour maps of bands, and I had an idea of doing a tour map of the Ziggy Stardust tour of Britain in 1972 to 1973, a tour that started the day before the Bloody Sunday Massacre in Northern Ireland. And so it was a tour about fantasy. But for most people, anyone that went on that tour probably changed their life, more or less, I can imagine. It changed you into a different kind of person. But also it was done at a time in Britain of great strife, not least because of the IRA. It started this bombing campaign, but virtually the sort of day after the tour started because of this event. And so you have these parallel stories. One of this amazing popular culture experience for people was pop music experience, transformative experience. And then you have all the sort of adult problems of that year, the kind of things the parents were worrying about, terrorism being one of them. But also it's a series of photographs. So what it is a series of photographs taken of the tour, people on the tour, like that picture I just showed you, but also it's photographs taken on the days of the tour of news stories, what was going on in London or what was going on in Belfast or Sheffield on the days of the tour. So it's these 2 stories, sort of the reality of living in Britain, but also this fantasy. And so there's photographs like this juxtaposed with ones of the young people at the concert. But I was very worried about doing this because I thought this could be incredibly glib, because you have a picture of that, like that, then you have a picture like this, and so on. This could look terrible, like terrorist chic or something like that. But actually, luckily, when you put all the pictures up around, you have about 30 pictures. You have the narrative is quite interesting, because it's not just terrorism. It's about people arriving from Uganda who've been sent away by Idi Amin, strikes and so on. But really, the Northern Ireland material is the strongest in a way, because often the people in the Northern Ireland photographs are children or young people, and they're having their minds sort of expanded and having these life-changing experiences through sort of street fighting, basically, with the British Army. So there's different ways to change yourself as a young person. But people in Northern Ireland, they didn't get to see David Bowie. He couldn't go. Bands couldn't tour to Northern Ireland at the time. It was too dangerous. So this was the most exciting thing probably would have happened to them at the time. This is the last image from the talk, by the way. You'll be glad to hear. But that's just another image for the thing. But I just love that idea that we're working together, because this is a year of strikes basically, and I think that's why they used that term. And I never noticed there's twins there in the front. These people just waiting for something to happen expectantly. Anyway, thank you very much. I think Scott's going to have a few words to me, and then we're going to take a few questions. So thank you. Questions, Scott?
You lost me bloody list, didn't you? Just stick it in there. Perfect. Cheers, thank you.
Are you hot?
Yeah, boring. I'll make it quick. I'll just do 2 questions.
Do a couple, and then because it's quite late. Actually.
Yeah. Okay. Is that all right?
20 seconds.
I'm going to try and relate it to them, their studentness. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really interesting. I don't know what they think.
Ready?
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like
You can
it.
hear us.
Love the sound of my own voice. It's okay. I'm really bad at asking questions because I tend to ask the question, then I try and answer it, and I talk about myself. So I'm just going to ask a...
Like Jonathan Ross.
Yeah. Fatter. Well, I thought about this quite a lot, and I'm trying to sort of ask things that I hopefully relate. I know not everybody's a student, but things that part of my asking Jeremy to come and do this was because I really can't remember how long I've known Jeremy when we met. I think it's through Earl Brutus, this band that we were obsessed by. But you know, obviously Jeremy, as he said himself, has not always been in this fantastic position he's in now. He used to work at a shop called Sign of the Times, and as he said, lived at home until he's 31. So there's hope for us all. But one thing I think I'm going to sort of say is that I'd say famously in my question, but I think you've said it many times that you can't draw, you can't paint, you can't take photographs,
No.
you can't put up a shelf.
Yes.
So what made you think you should be an artist?
That is a very, very good question. I think it was basically it was because my opportunities were actually narrowing down. I studied art history for 3 years. I was trained to be an art historian. Like I should have worked at Christie's or the National Gallery or somewhere like that. And I realised as soon as I walked into an office, this is not the place I should not be in an office.
Yeah.
And then it just got worse and worse. I became a technician at an art gallery. And on the first day, I burnt a David Hockney print. Literally, the first thing I was asked to do was take a label off the back of this print, which I did with this sort of like paint stripper sort of hairdryer thing, which I did very well. Yeah. And then I turned it around and realised I'd burnt the whole print, and I just shoved it in a rack and didn't say anything.
Yes, resigned.
Yeah, that was literally 10 in the morning on the first day.
Oh shit, bloody hell.
But I managed to last 6 months there, and I just realised that I was generally just incompetent at lots of things.
Yeah, but at least you tried, right?
And I did. I thought I could go into advertising, which I probably, maybe could have done, but it would have just soul destroying possibly. And so it was. I liked art and I understood it, and I was at ease in museums and in places of culture. So I just thought I could work in this world somehow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things I've always loved about your work, and one of the things I keep, little contact I've had with some of the students, but to me, and increasingly so, it's about ideas. I think what you're wonderful at is, you're very clear ideas. Very clear. You have it's a 2-part thing. This. Right. You're very good at ideas. You're very good at articulating the idea afterwards. Yeah. So what I was going to say, what I think is, see how I said I talk about me? What I'm trying to ask is a question.
Yeah.
So the question is, I imagine the drive that made you want to be an artist is that you saw this culture and you thought you wanted to inflict your own culture onto that, rather than accept this as the adult, gormley, established culture. You thought it should change.
Well, I was always disappointed with contemporary art not treating things I liked properly or seriously, or not even addressing them. Yeah. So a lot of the early art I made was almost could have been made by teenagers, all about pop music and things I loved, and the art world at that time, as you were probably around it and you may know about it, sort of a legendary art world of the early 90s, was not interested in politics or pop music or popular culture really. It was interested in itself, effectively, I felt. It was about making objects and putting things in galleries.
Yeah, it was this dead end.
And it was kind of boring in a way and a bit silly, and I just thought, actually, there's fun to be had here. and I want to have fun and do stupid things, and there are people that wanted to do them with me, thankfully. But it was just I was very, I think I'm very comfortable with culture and with television and with music. At least I was then.
Yeah.
And I just thought I can do something with this.
Yeah. But also, I think what differentiates you from the kind of, let's call them the first generation YBAs is that there's a genuine politic. With as much as I love Sarah Lucas and her work, let's not mention any of the others.
Yeah, because we are being filmed by that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we'd be on. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're slightly younger than them, and you weren't part of that Goldsmiths gang.
No.
But I think that you had something more to say outside of art as well.
Maybe. I'm not. I think probably I was, and I was more interested in current affairs and history, and that's what I was looking at. I wasn't looking at art. I was looking at things around me, maybe. Not. I mean, the miners' strike thing is clearly a very political artwork, and I was happy to do that at a time when everyone else was felt like everyone else was hanging around with Elton John. I was making something about miners, and then he does Billy Elliot, which is sort of weird because then
it's very weird, isn't it?
Sort of muscles in on my thing. And, but I just felt it's good to let's make an artwork about trade unions rather than about.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's what underpins everything you do. I think is this, without any kind of earnestness. It's not this kind of art wank thing. It's about that you deal with an outside world as well.
So that's a technical term.
Well, if anyone wants to explain art wank to them later, I can. Okay, I'm going to. I know that Jeremy. I know that we've been here in a while, and so I'm going to shut up. Is there anybody want to ask any questions?
I wonder, are you doing anything because of the 30th?
Oh, you have to speak to a microphone for posterity. Yeah.
I wonder if you're doing anything for the anniversary. For the 30 years. Are
we doing anything for the 30th anniversary? Well, I made a film. I couldn't show any of it tonight. We just don't have time. And that's being screened. It was screened at the weekend in Chesterfield. Anyone knows Chesterfield? I was there with about 200 former miners, showing them the film. It's a bit scary, really, because they are the experts on the miners' strike, because they lived it. And so, even though the film was made 13 years ago, it was still interesting for them to see it. And
so you're re-screening that?
We'll do re-screening. I'll do whatever they want, basically. I'll screen it wherever, but I'm not going to make more art about it. One day, I would like to make a feature film about it, but we'll see. I shouldn't really talk about that, but that's something I would. I think when you saw those images, you saw those stills, not from my thing, but from the strike. This is epic. This is an epic story, as big as any story in Britain ever. It's a war. It's almost a war story with thousands of people. It's a big story, so it deserves proper treatment, I think, by the media.
Okay, we're going to do about three questions or so. So anybody else want to ask a question? Paul.
Student. They look older now, don't they? Students? I thought they made look younger.
Do you ever think that sometimes we'd be better off forgetting our histories?
Well, that's an interesting question. Maybe. I quite like it. Hold it. That's not a very good answer, is it? Okay. Well, there is that very famous quote by Marx, isn't there? Those who forget the past. Is it by Marx? Maybe Cicero. Yeah,
you stay a child or whatever.
Those
you
who
don't know your history.
Those who forget the past are content to repeat it.
Oh no, yes.
Is that Marx? Yeah. I mean, beautiful. I mean, Karl Marx is a great poet, really, isn't he? You think of things those, but no, I don't think we should really. I don't think we should. We shouldn't be sentimental about it and shouldn't wallow in it. I mean, going on about the Second World War being endlessly repeated on television, there is a point where you just have to say, actually, I'm not really interested anymore in this. But I think and being sentimental about history as well, and misrepresenting it, then you could argue, well, maybe I was misrepresenting it. But so with the miners' strike film, for example, I didn't want anyone crying in it. I didn't want it to be sentimental. Actually, someone does cry in it, but it's difficult to stop someone crying if they're really upset, obviously. But I didn't want that. But no, I don't. No, we shouldn't forget it.
Okay. Yeah. Two more questions. Anybody who wants to do it?
You've been very strict.
Well, I am, because I want to go for a drink.
Another young student here.
Yeah, so useful.
And not a profound question either. In any form of art, because I'm not at all artistic really, I don't get where people get their ideas from. And as I was watching your presentation there, I wondered, how the hell did you alight on Adrian Street? And the reason I say that is I'm probably maybe the only one who's old enough in this room to have actually been
Don't
to
think
the
so, looking around.
there's a few. But my dad used to take me to see Adrian Street.
Really?
And watch the,
Oh,
the sort of
fantastic.
Croydon and Fairfield halls
Yes,
and see
yes.
him live. And so,
Yeah.
you know, loads of memories there. But I was thinking, you know, of all of the work you've done, how did that come about?
It was that photograph of him and his father. I looked at that and I thought, I need to know about this, because this is a very complex, interesting, sort of epoch-defining image, I felt. And that's why I did it, because I was intrigued. And that's why I was intrigued about what happened in the miners' strike, intrigued about this or that. It's just some research thing, really. But I think that image just takes him somewhere else entirely. If that image didn't exist, I probably wouldn't have that much interest in him. I mean, his persona is this sort of transvestite, possibly gay image he had, but even though he isn't gay and would never, there's not a gay bone in his body. I mean, he's just so heterosexual. It's not true. But it was that photograph and what that represented to me. That's how I remember the 70s. Is either glam rock or power cuts, and there it is. That is the 70s,
Yeah.
and sometimes both at the same time. And he just sort of summed up a decade in a photograph.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I mean, we have a mutual friend, Luke Haynes, don't we? Luke was a great fan of this image. And but one thing I never quite get to with my own work, and that Jeremy does, I think, is that because I'm a trained graphic designer, and I think a great artist can always kind of, you know, he could, I mean, as Jeremy has done with this image becomes almost like a catalyst for 10 or 15 years of work. It's been expanded. You know, you could easily argue the whole, at least in part, that a massive amount of the Venice Biennale show is based around that, an explosion of that image, really. And I think it's quite important for the designers here. I think that's a really important point, that we tend to skip and move on and don't dig deep enough sometimes. And I think,
especially in the world now where there's a billion images a day you can look at. When you see that picture, you might as well. I've looked at that picture probably more than anyone else in the world, I suspect.
Yeah, I bet you have.
And
apart from Adrian Street.
And I still, apart from well, actually, weirdly enough, Adrian, I got him this huge version of it when I did a show and used it as a poster. And I gave it to him. I said, "Here it is." And he said, "Oh, you could have just cut it in half." And put my dad in it. You know, he doesn't. He hates it now because his dad's in it. He's made his dad famous. But you could look at that picture forever. And I could do a whole talk on that, 2 hours to talk about that. Yeah. It's like looking at a painting, and it looks like a painting as well. There's a lot of, like the Ambassadors, the Holbein painting. Yeah. It's like a lot of Renaissance portraiture. It has that feel to it, in the way you can look at a painting for hours, but it's difficult to look at a photograph for hours. Yeah. But that photograph is so beautifully composed. It's perfect. Yeah. A guy called Dennis Hutchinson from the Sunday People. Right. I mean, it's a sort of piece of photojournalism, but because it's Adrian, he's obviously staged it and knew exactly. He'd been probably planning in his head for years this photograph with this big belt, which looks like it's made by this handmade belt, the European champion, middleweight champion. He'd been, probably as soon as he left the pit, he'd been thinking about returning as this prodigal son to just say, "Up yours, Wales." And you, Dad, as well. His dad used to beat him as a kid. His dad was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp, and then went back to Wales and went back to the mine. So I mean, he has like an archetypal, tough, hard life, and was like quite abusive to his son.
Yeah. Okay. One more question.
One more.
It better be a good one, because the last one.
Yeah, this is.
A lot of your work is produced in in trade union cultures, in working class cultures, or in communities.
Yeah.
And it often takes place as a performance, and it's shown there. But then it also has quite a fine art aspect, as in it's shown at Venice Biennale and a lot of other kind of high art venues. What do you think about this kind of interesting relationship, and who do you kind of feel is your kind of audience for this work?
Well, for example, the Orgreave event, I will call it that, is a piece of performance art. The primary audience are there's an audience for that of 2,000 or 3,000 people. And then it sort of ripples out. The effect of it ripples out. You make a film, a documentary, and then that's seen by lots of people. And then you do an installation, a gallery, that's seen by different people. But it's good to get art like that into art galleries, because a lot of people who go to art galleries are not interested in these things. And so it's good to have a mix and show things in different places. I'm just interested in anyone that wants to see my work, really. My audience is not collectors necessarily, it's just whoever's around, frankly. I'm not a snob in that way. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the art world is quite elitistic, but in Britain, it's probably not that elitistic compared to some other, like compared to America, for example. But part of the Venice show is on in London at the moment, at the Walthamstow, at the William Morris Gallery. Free entry until the end of the month. So
should go to that, anybody.
You get free gifts. There's free stuff at it as well.
Yeah, free art.
Yeah, free prints.
Okay.
Is that it, Scott?
I think, well, it's 7:30. It's time for me to go to the bar. Okay, thank you everybody for coming. Thanks very much, especially to Jeremy for doing that.
Thank you.